Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's call with Congressman Adam Smith. During this event, we'll be taking questions from constituents like you. To ask a question, please press star 3 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. And during this call, you can sign up to receive the Congressman's newsletter by pressing star 6 at any time. Again, please press star 3 to ask a question and star 6 to subscribe to our newsletter. With that, I'll turn it over to Congressman Smith. Congressman, the floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. I want to start by saying, first of all, appreciate everyone joining this call. Look forward to your questions and comments. Please feel free to reach out to my office. I try to do as many teletown halls as I can to keep in touch with the maximum number of people, but not your only opportunity to tell me what's on your mind, what you think we ought to be doing. Please email, call, however you want to communicate. Let us know what you're concerned about. And there's a lot going on. I'll try to hit just a few of the highlights and then cover whatever subjects you're interested in this evening. To begin with, the Trump administration is accelerating efforts to my mind, undermine the basic rule of law and the Constitution by moving forward with plans that empower the president over Congress. We've seen this, in a number of different areas, most directly in spending. I've been back home now for like 3 weeks, so I've been going around the district meeting with various groups, and all manner of federal grants that had been approved by Congress, signed by the president, and agreed to have been blocked and cut off on everything from housing to emergency management to childcare, environmental restoration. I was down at around Lake Sammamish yesterday at a Sammamish Creek restoration project. They had about $3.5 million in grants that were due to come in for a project that was ongoing that got blocked back in February. They fought for a couple of months. They were able to get the money turned back on, but it was very disruptive. And in many cases, that money hasn't been turned back on. And that is without congressional agreement. And so it's caused a lot of disruption and undermined a number of different programs. And of course, the president has been very aggressive about tariffs. Congress has the power to enact tariffs, not the president. And yet he has done it over and over again, with just about every country in the world at one time or another, and not in any sort of coherent fashion. I mean, let's just take Brazil. He put a 50% tariff on everything coming out of Brazil because he didn't like the way the Brazilian government was treating former President Bolsonaro, which I guess is something we could have a debate about. But how is that advancing U.S. economic interests to pick a political fight with Brazil? So I'm very concerned about that. And then on immigration, we've seen the raids from ICE and supporting agencies really pick up speed across the country, where they are picking up people in many cases without due process. And in doing so, they've picked up people who are green card holders. They have legal permanent resident status. In some cases, citizens have been picked up and detained. And we've had to struggle to get them legal representation, to get them released. So there's no due process. And I know a lot of people think, well, if you're undocumented, you don't deserve due process. Well, that's how we know if you are, in fact, undocumented. That's the point around the process. And that's just simply not being considered by the Trump administration. And now we've also seen the increasing efforts at domestic law enforcement, either through the Department of Homeland Security or in some cases through the use of the Department of Defense. We saw it in Los Angeles when active duty Marines were called up to help enforce the law in Los Angeles, as well as in, I think it was like 3,500 guardsmen. And now they've called up the Guard in Washington, D.C., and the president has threatened to do that in other places as well. And the budget reconciliation bill that passed had $170 billion additional dollars for the Department of Homeland Security. This is an agency that has a typical yearly budget of around $30 or $40 billion. That money was earmarked to build a lot more detention facilities in the U.S. and to hire a lot more agents to pick people up off the streets and detain them. I think this is a direct violation of the rights of all Americans. And whether you're, left, right, or center, you should be concerned about a federal government exercising this amount of power to take away people's individual freedom and their individual rights without due process. It is accelerating. I think we need to stand up against that. We also have the budget coming up. As I mentioned, the president has already rewritten some aspects of the budget that were passed into law. So the federal fiscal year ends on October 1st. And for discretionary spending programs, we then have to approve further spending. And there's a major fight over that, because if Democrats agree to this, or if Congress agrees to this for that matter, what the president has shown during his first 8 months in office is he's not going to pay any attention to the law anyway. He feels like, okay, Congress passed this, but I can go ahead and spend the money that I want to spend and not spend the money that I don't want to spend. And I think that really undermines the basic premise of a representative democracy and of our constitutional republic. So come October 1st, you're liable to have a pretty nasty fight over how to spend the money. I know people talk about when Congress doesn't pass appropriations bills, the government shuts down. It's more complicated than that. The money keeps coming in. Mandatory programs like Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, that spending keeps going out. And then the debate is how to spend the money on discretionary spending programs if Congress hasn't approved it. So we have those discussions. There's going to be a big fight over that. Lastly, as most of you probably know, the president is going to meet with Vladimir Putin tomorrow in Alaska to discuss the situation in Ukraine. That is very concerning about how that conversation is going to go. I think it's perfectly fine that he should meet, that President Trump should meet, but I hope that he doesn't give in to Vladimir Putin's demands. It is an illegal invasion going on in Ukraine. We should stand with Ukraine and force Putin to negotiate a settlement, not from a position of weakness, from a position of strength. So I think everyone's going to be watching that and be very concerned about what President Trump's going to do in terms of standing up for the principles of sovereignty in Ukraine. Whole lot else going on. I could talk for the whole hour, but I find it vastly more productive to hear from you. So I will turn it back to the moderator and I'll take your questions and comments and suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And as a quick reminder, if you have a question you'd like to ask live on this telephone town hall, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. And don't forget to also take a minute during this event and get signed up to receive the Congressman's informative e-newsletter by pressing *6. So again, if you've got a question, please press *3 and press *6 to get subscribed to our newsletter. And now to Renton Now, we've got Candace on the line with us. Welcome, Candace. You are live with Congressman Smith. What's your question?
I really want to know what people are planning to do strong pushback with the ICE raids, with the immigration, with the masking of these unidentified individuals. And now the media is reporting that some ladies have been sexually assaulted because people are taking advantage of such this dangerous process. We need stronger pushback for that. I also want to know how, if he's closing down all of these organizations and he's downsizing everything, where are our tax dollars going? How are those tax dollars now being allocated? Are they going to go back to the states so that we can fund our own education for our children? I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah, no, I think you have identified a couple of, a whole bunch of different deep concerns what the Trump administration is doing. Look, it is implementing a police state. That's what ICE is doing, as I outlined in my opening remarks. So I'm speaking out as aggressively publicly as I possibly can, and also trying to lobby people to grow our support and opposition to these actions. That's why I say, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, whatever, you should not want the federal government to have police state powers over your individual liberty and your individual freedom. So, whether it's on cable news shows or social media, I identify these problems, speak out aggressively against it, and try to persuade my Republican colleagues in Congress to join us in pushing back against this. And I think that's what we need to do. As far as where the dollars are going, the president funds some programs and doesn't fund others. Now, keep in mind, 71% of the budget is mandatory spending, primarily Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So that happens. Now, one caveat on that, which I'll get back to in a minute, but it's in the discretionary portions of the budget, as I said, for things like emergency management, education, some healthcare programs, housing, that the president is selectively blocking programs. And where that money is going is he's just holding on to it. And also, there is an incredibly partisan approach. There were floods in Texas. The federal government did release emergency funding for that. There were floods in Maryland, and they didn't. The president blocked that. So that's where a lot of that money is going. So, look, the way they're handling this right now is very, very troubling. And back to the mandatory portion of the spending, they are making it more difficult to claim your benefits. So one idea that is being floated by the Trump administration is to require pre-approval from Medicare and Medicaid before you can get procedures from your healthcare provider, which would slow down the process and block treatment. So I signed on to a letter with a group of other members of
people
Congress.
will die behind that type of legislation.
100%. And it's not legislation. It's executive action. The president does not have the
people will die behind that type of executive action.
Absolutely. Yes, they will. And I think we need to speak out aggressively and publicly about it, which I have been doing since, the day after President Trump got elected. And we have got to build a strong enough coalition to turn this around and stop it from happening. The president's approval ratings.
The other thing I would ask you to do is to please use your voice to support as strong and tactfully as you can the efforts that Governor Gavin Newsom is putting out to protect our democracy. However, that being said, I heard Gavin Newsom. I listened to his speech, every word of it, and I agree with a good 85%, maybe 93% of what he said. But
okay.
I wish he'd say louder and often, if the Republicans stop gerrymandering and stop disobeying laws, the Democrats would do that too. I would also like to hear him say, or maybe hear you tell him, please, or ask him to please.
And I'll say it myself too.
Nonviolent protest, hands across America, is still a good way to get some of this stuff done. Peaceful demonstration, peaceful protesting.
Completely agree.
But yes, definitely, we can't play with the government that doesn't play by the rules.
Yeah, ma'am, I got to let a couple of people in here, but I participated in the No Kings rallies a month or so ago, which was millions of people in hundreds of cities all across the country doing precisely that. And that, I think, needs to continue to happen. Thank you.
So our next caller with a question is Christopher in Federal Way. Christopher, welcome to the call. You are live. Go ahead with your question, please. Hello, Christopher.
Hello?
Yes, we got you. Go ahead.
Now.
Hey, Congressman. I just had a couple of questions. One of them was Epstein. How much pressure or continued pressure is both parties going to put on pressure to get everything released, and also make sure the victims of the case is protected? That's my number one.
I didn't hear the first part of that. Pressure on what?
On the Epstein case.
Yes.
President Trump. How are you going to continue putting pressure on getting all the facts out? I know they can't get everything out for the public to see, but get enough information for the public to see where whose names are on there, who it doesn't matter what party that needs to be taken down in jail possibly. And my second question is, I'm really concerned about, I know something that you were talking about with what's going on with the Smithsonian's museums, part of history that's being, I won't say whitewashed. I'm actually
a total whitewash.
And
yes.
I love Black history. I love history of the United States. But one of the things I'm looking, listening and hearing is that he wants to take out a lot of things that are based off of true events from not just that museum, African American Museum, but a lot of the Smithsonian museums just in general, and put it in the way that he wants it to be, where is convenient for him and not for everyone.
Absolutely. Now, both those are really important questions. On Epstein, yes, we need to keep pushing for, release of the documents so we can see what's there. personally, I think the most important part of that story that people need to remember is the way Trump lied about the Epstein situation. And Trump and also his supporters, his campaign team, they tried to claim that there was that Biden was holding in this information because it incriminated all of these Democrats. And it was just this complete and total lie. And now that he has access to the documents, he's saying there's nothing there. So hold him accountable for his lies. I'm really very frustrated by the number of people. Well, Trump says stuff. What is that? To take him seriously, not literally. Well, that's ridiculous. He lied about what was in the Epstein documents to impugn and incriminate people's reputations. And this is not someone who is then a credible person to listen to. And also, it just happens to be the case that the person of all the powerful people in America who has the closest connection to Jeffrey Epstein is Donald Trump, who had a 15-year well-documented friendship with him. So just the brazenness of Trump to be able to spread those lies about other people when he had the closer relationship ought to be exposed. We ought to keep the pressure up to say, put up or shut up, and then show us the documents. So we're going to keep working on that aspect of it. And then your second question, sorry, I'm forgetting what that was.
So it was regards to the Smithsonian museums, how Trump
Smithsonian, yeah.
Keeping...
Look, no, as the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee, the Department of Defense under Pete Hegseth has been one of the leaders in whitewashing our history. And that's absolutely the way to look at it. Because what they've done is they are, for instance, they changed the name of we named a ship after Harvey Milk, who was the gay rights person in San Francisco. And they purged that. They also went through and they purged some 24,000 photos and documents across the Department of Defense. And they purged the word gay from anywhere in these documents, which led to the rather amusing situation where all pictures of the Enola Gay, the plane that dropped the first nuclear bomb over Hiroshima, was pulled out because it had gay in it, even though it meant something different. They pulled biographies of Jackie Robinson off the shelf. They're talking about, taking away the name of a ship that was named after Medgar Evers, the civil rights pioneer in Mississippi. They are attempting a right-wing cultural revolution that ignores the historical contributions of anyone who's not a straight white male. And that just contributes to racism and bigotry. They also want to go back to naming, and they have gone back to naming military bases after Confederate generals. When I was chair of the Armed Services Committee, we changed that. We got rid of those names. We renamed those bases so that they weren't named after white supremacists. And now they're undoing that, all to whitewash our history and ignore the reality of what has happened, and to denigrate the contributions of all Americans, regardless of race, gender, or any of that. To say that it's only white men that we're going to focus on, I think really undermines the credibility of what is a diverse nation. And now he's going after the Smithsonian in the same way to really rewrite history. Now, I don't think that we should denigrate the United States of America. I know some people disagree with me on that. But I do think that we should be honest about our history. And we've worked through it. The civil rights movement was an enormous movement to end Jim Crow and end discrimination and give all people the right to vote. It worked. It was good. We did it. And now they're undoing it, and they're blanking out that history. I think it also contributes to bigotry and discrimination and violence against people who are bigoted against Black people, against gay people, against trans people. We're seeing such an increase in that sort of bigotry, and now we've got the president sort of giving a stamp of approval to that by undermining the history of what has happened in this country and of the contributions that all Americans have made to our history. So yeah, we need to speak out aggressively against that, and it's deeply disturbing.
If you have a question you'd like to ask Congressman Smith, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. And don't forget to sometime during this live telephone town hall, press *6 to get signed up to receive the Congressman's informative newsletter. Now we're heading out to SeaTac, and we've got Savio on the phone. Savio, you are live with the Congressman. Go ahead with your question, please.
Good evening, Congressman Smith. This is Savio Pham. I do not have a question, but I do want to raise my sincere appreciation for your office intervention in helping one of the detainees at the Tacoma Detention Centers. So I run a medical clinic in Federal Way, and part of what we do is provide the medical examinations for immigration. And the Immigration Northwest Immigrant Rights Project contacted us with a case where one of the detainees that needed to have the medical examination done quickly because his court date was very soon, and we faced a lot of delays from the ICE officers. So then we don't know what to do, and so the last resort, I contacted your office, and your staff, your case manager helped out, reaching out to ICE, and so we were able to get the detainee out, completed the examinations, and finish up the medical examinations one day before the court date. So
Okay.
on behalf of the clinic and the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, I'd like to thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And that's something I want to offer up to everyone on the call here. I mean, I want to change the policies that Trump has implemented for ICE and other federal agencies. But in the meantime, we do casework. And where people are being unfairly treated, unfairly held, we're going to help. We'll try to reach out to everyone we can. We have excellent caseworkers in my office, appreciate their work. We also work with our senators and others. So as you have these cases come up, we want to try to defend people's rights and help them. So please use us as a resource, and thank you. That's a good description of how we try to help.
All right, our next caller is Sharon from Kent. Sharon, welcome to the call. You are live with Congressman Smith. Go ahead with your question, please.
Good evening, Congressman. Congressman, I am very concerned about what is going on down in Texas with Republicans trying to eliminate Democratic seats in Congress. What can we do up here in Washington to push back against that?
Yeah. Well, speak out, first of all. And second of all, I agree with what Gavin Newsom said. And sort of the beauty of what Gavin Newsom said is, look, we're not going to redistrict in California unless Texas does it, unless Republicans do it, or unless we have to balance that out. We're not trying to go down this road, but we Democrats are not just going to roll over as the Republicans ignore every rule and every norm and force forward these political outcomes. I think we have to say that clearly. And part of the thing is, in most Democratic states, like in Washington State and in California and elsewhere, we have a bipartisan or nonpartisan redistricting commission. Because ideally, in a democracy, gerrymandering for partisan purposes is not allowed. You don't want to draw up the districts to disproportionately represent one ideology over another. In fact, Iowa, I think, has the best system. Iowa has a completely nonpartisan system. Every 10 years, they hire demographers who do not consider where incumbents live, do not consider partisanship. They just draw the districts in the most reasonable way possible. And that's what we ought to do. But if the Republicans are not going to do that, if they're going to gerrymander the states so that you elect members of Congress who empower, what Trump is doing and don't stand up to it, then we have got to fight back to try to balance that out. So I think we need to speak out publicly. And the other thing we need to do, and what I have done, is we need to go and talk to more conservative audiences as well. Just last week, I was on Newsmax, which is a very right-wing news organization, arguing about this. And I made the strong case about why what Texas is doing is wrong and pushed back on some of their arguments. We have got to not just preach to the choir here in Washington State. We've got to be able to reach out to a broader audience to pull people over to our support, and also understand why gerrymandering has happened for a long time. What's happening in Texas is something that only Republicans have ever done. In the middle of a 10-year cycle, ordering the state legislature to redraw the lines. And keep in mind, the lines in Texas were drawn in 2022 by a Republican-controlled legislature and a Republican governor. They're already gerrymandered in favor of Republicans. President Trump simply ordered them to gerrymander them to an even more extreme level to give Republicans even more of an unfair advantage. This has never been done before. The president has never ordered such a thing. Now, as it happens, Republicans in Texas did it 20 years ago when Tom DeLay was the majority leader in the House, ordered them to do that, and that's just undermining our democratic system. So we got to speak out against it. Go to places where aren't necessarily just Democratic audiences, and then fight fire with fire, as Governor Newsom said, if we have to. I would also support a nationwide effort to do nonpartisan redistricting. The Supreme Court has also contributed to this. I mean, they ruled that gerrymandering isn't something that they're going to touch. But the Constitution, fundamental bedrock principle of the Constitution, is one person, one vote. And if that's being undermined by redistricting, that does violate the Constitution, and the Supreme Court ought to step in and uphold it. So we should put pressure on the court to say this is a legitimate issue of our democracy and our Constitution, not one to be ignored and left to partisans in the state.
Do you know if Washington has any plans on redrawing their map in the way that
I don't believe
California does?
Yeah, I don't really. Now, as we have a bipartisan commission. The other thing about Washington State is right now it's 8-2 in favor of Democrats over Republicans, and the 2 Republican seats are in Eastern Washington. So, I mean, we already have a pretty substantial advantage here. You could redraw to redraw the lines in Washington State in such a way that would advantage Democrats even more. You would have to take districts like mine and send it over into Eastern Washington. I mean, right now, not to get too much into geography here, but the 4th and the 5th districts, which are in Eastern Washington, go side by side, sort of horizontally, I want to say. So we'd have to flip those over, make them vertical, and then have portions of those districts come over into areas like King, Pierce, and Snohomish County. You'd have to get really creative. And I'm not sure even if you did that, you'd be able to do better than 8-2. So at the moment, they're not talking about that. But the state legislature would have to do that. They would have, because we passed an initiative, 25 years ago, 30 years ago now. They created this bipartisan commission. So we would have to have the state legislature come in, undo that bipartisan commission, go back to just doing it by the state legislature, and then we draw those lines. I have not heard our state legislature say that they plan on doing that.
Okay, thank you.
It is great to see so many people have connected into this live telephone town hall with Congressman Adam Smith. If you've got a question you would like to ask, please press star 3 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue, and also take a moment and press star 6 to get yourself subscribed to the Congressman's e-newsletter so you can stay up to date. Let's get back to a caller now. We've got Brandy on the line with us. Brandy, welcome to the call. Go ahead with your question now.
Hello, Congressman. Thanks for taking my question. I really appreciate all of the critical dialogue going on in this call. I feel a little bit embarrassed about my question. It's not so weighty, at least not in the way
That's
that all
okay.
these other questions are. I am just curious to know what your thinking is regarding the clawback funding, specifically a lot of the grant funding that was already contracted through the funding source, our Inflation Reduction Act, et cetera, and whether or not you think there's going to be a possibility in the future through a new budgeting process to bring forward those sorts of initiatives again. So, for example, there's been a lot of cuts to anything that has to do with climate resilience, a lot of cuts to even just the USDA, NRCS, RCPP program and doing fish passage barrier removal. Like, all that money has just gone away, even if it was contracted, even if people were already working on those projects. And I mean, I think that it's really perplexing to know that something can be appropriated and then just gone. Not only appropriated but contracted, and then it's, with the sign of a pen, it's gone. I guess that's fine in the sense that this is the prerogative of Congress and the president to do this sort of thing. I think what
It's
I'm
not.
looking for from, okay, well, what I'm looking for
Yeah,
from you is a little help to understand what might be possible in the future, because there's a lot
sure.
of really great work that has just ground to a halt. And I know that we're in crisis in a lot of ways, but for those of us who need to focus on doing something productive, this is what we do. We do this kind of work, and now the money is not there to continue to do the work on top of all the sort of like existential angst that we're experiencing around
Sure.
these sorts of
Yeah. Well,
policies we're
actually,
discussing.
I think your question is perhaps weightier than you realize because it gets to the core of how the Trump administration is just violating the Constitution and ruling our country like an autocrat, not like the president of a constitutional republic. This is some $850 billion in federally appropriated funds that the president has stepped in and undone the law and simply said, I'm not going to fund this. I'm not going to fund that. And you're right. It has been devastating to programs in a variety of different places. And we've had to fight for the last 7 or 8 months to get it restored where we can. In some cases, we've had some success. I mentioned earlier in the call, I don't know if you were on, but there's a restoration project down in the Sammamish Creek area leading into Lake Sammamish where we're for salmon restoration. They had been working on it and they had pre-approved grants already there. And then Trump came in and said, nope, we're not giving you the money. And we had to fight for 2 months to get that money turned back on. That is completely illegal, completely wrong, and undermines democracy. You know, for the executive branch to come in and say that they control the budget and Congress is irrelevant, that violates the law, violates the Constitution. I also take your point that aside from violating the law and violating the Constitution, these are critical programs that are making a difference in our community on a wide range of issues. I met with a group of emergency management planners who are trying to deal with floods, potential earthquakes, wildfires. You know, these are programs that were approved to help deal with that, prevent that in some instances, that have been shut off, that are now undermining our community. Housing projects. You know, we have a major housing crisis in our area and across the country. Federal grants approved, shut down, disrupting projects, not allowing them to go forward. One of the best ways the federal government helps our community is through these grants. And all of these programs, by the way, work with state and local money. It's not a federal project per se. The state and local governments, working in some cases with nonprofits, support housing projects. They support environmental restoration projects. And then the federal government gives that last little piece of money to make the project happen and improves the quality of life across our communities. So they're really important, helpful projects that are a small amount of money. We're not talking about the trillions of dollars in tax cuts that were just given away. We're talking about millions in most instances that make a difference in our community. And the president just came in and set a blowtorch to all of that. So it's unconstitutional, it's unlawful, and it's also bad policy as we go forward. And I think we need to identify that and stand up for those programs because this is a direction that's really going to undermine our ability to have safe, efficient, effective communities. So yeah, we're going to have to push back. We're trying to do that. Final piece of this is, and this is where the courts, the Supreme Court in particular, has let us down. There have been a whole bunch of federal district court rulings and in some cases appellate court rulings that have stated the obvious. This is illegal. This is money that's appropriated to the law. The president can't come in and just turn it off. The Supreme Court has said those decisions cannot stop the president from doing what he's doing. We will ultimately decide. And yet they have not, on the Supreme Court level, ultimately decided. So they've just left it in limbo and they've allowed the president to get away with these illegal, unconstitutional acts. Now, little shout out to Nick Brown, who's the Attorney General of the state of Washington. He has participated in a lot of the lawsuits to push back against these unlawful and unconstitutional actions by the Trump administration. Gotten a lot of favorable rulings, as I've mentioned. But look, we should be a nation of laws, not a nation run by one egomaniac. And we're in danger right now of losing our constitutional republic. And there's a number of different issues here. But the one you identify, and that is the grant funding that has been stopped illegally, is certainly one of the biggest that reflects, like I said, not a constitutional republic, but the dictate of one person.
Yeah. So does it mean, Congressman, that at some point it's possible that that the spigot can be turned on again for the projects that
Yeah.
have already been vetted and funded? It's just like, I mean, I guess, for these entities like my entity that puts these proposals together, it's capital that we spend to compete, and we've already gone through a review process. We've already been contracted, and now it's been clawed back. And so my question I think I'm trying to get at here as a follow-up question to you is, like, I know that I hear what you're saying, that, things need to happen at the congressional level, things need to happen at the
Well, yeah.
Supreme Court level.
I mean, sorry, I
and then
think we can answer.
Sorry, go ahead.
But yes, as I said, in some instances, we have been able to claw back the clawback. We've been able to block what they've blocked and persuaded them to turn that money back on. And we do that as one of the big things my office has been doing for the last 8 months, is we've taken these concerns, and in some instances, they have turned the money back on. And yeah, we need to fight that fight in the short term to try to get the money turned back on. In some cases, it does work.
Hearing nothing further, let's go ahead and jump to the next caller with a question. We've got Leslie from Federal Way joining us. Leslie, you are live on the call. Go ahead with your question, please.
Hello. Thank you so much for doing this town hall. My first question is regarding these rapid response military plans that Trump has to send National Guard troops into different cities and take over.
Yeah. This is actually deeply concerning for two reasons. One, again, it is basically the federal government using military force to take away our individual rights. We've seen it in Los Angeles. We're seeing it in DC. We've seen it as all manner of different other federal agencies have now been loaned out to ICE to do some of these individual raids. But I'm going to freak you out a little further here, because the other thing that is concerning about this is Trump is trying to assert control over domestic law enforcement and the U.S. military, personal control. And at the Department of Defense, they have fired a number of different generals who they did not consider to be sufficiently loyal to Trump. This happened with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It happened with the head of NSA Cyber Command. He wants people in the military that are loyal to him. Now, part of that is because of the domestic stuff that I've mentioned, that he's sending these folks out into cities and communities to basically, violate people's rights and enforce the law as Donald Trump sees fit. But the other part of this that is concerning, I was the chair of the Armed Services Committee in 2020 in the lead up to that election and the follow up afterwards. And I was on the phone on a regular basis with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, Mark Milley, and the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper. Mark Esper used to call me up frequently at that time frame and said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm probably going to be fired by the end of the day, but he was trying to stop Donald Trump from using the military to hold on to power back in 2020. And he did that. And he actually didn't wind up getting fired until I think it was December. So now Trump recognizes that in 2020, one of the problems was he didn't have control of the military. When the military did show up on January 6th, it was to clear out the protesters, reinstate democratic order, and make sure that the election results were honored. So what I'm worried about is that Trump is trying to control the military. So come 2028, when he doesn't want to leave again, he's got the military on his side to force out whatever the next government would be. So, and again, I know Republican, Democrat, and I'm in a different world here. I've worked on public policy for a long time and in politics. And, I've had disagreements with Republicans. Obviously, I've had disagreements with Democrats. We've worked on policy and you try to work through that. We are in a different place now. We have a president who is not honoring the law. He's not honoring the Constitution. He is trying to consolidate power in his hands. And I see what he is doing with the military. And I know that it is an effort to make sure that if he feels like he doesn't want to honor the outcome of an election or simply stop an election from happening, that he'll have the military on his side this time. I'll say one final positive thing on this question. I've worked with the United States military. I've had the privilege and honor of being on the Armed Services Committee for 29 years now. The men and women who serve in our military are absolutely loyal to the Constitution. They know that we have civilian control of the military. They know that we are a nation of laws, not a nation of individuals. And they know that they are not supposed to obey unlawful orders. Now, Trump's doing everything he can to break that ethos, but it's 200 and almost 50 years now strong. Actually, it is 250 years strong. Celebrated the 250th anniversary of the Army not long ago. So I do trust the military, but Trump is trying to undermine that in a wide variety of ways.
So if you have a question you'd like to ask, please press *3 to enter the question queue so you can ask your question live on this call. And also don't forget, the congressman and his staff put together a very informative e-newsletter. They send it out via email. You can get signed up to receive that by pressing *6 on your telephone keypad during this event. So again, if you've got a question on your mind, please press *3. And to get enrolled in the congressman's e-newsletter, press *6. And next up from Facebook, we've got a comment and question from Jackie, who says, today is the 90th anniversary of Social Security. We can't let it be privatized or bleed the trust fund. Scrap the cap. And she wonders, Congressman, do you support scrapping the cap?
I do. We've talked about this issue many times. Look, Social Security is a bedrock way to help secure people in this country. You know, the poverty rate for senior citizens prior to the advent of Social Security and Medicare was right around 50%. I haven't checked recently, but I know a few years ago and for quite some time, it's been below 10. It's been at like 8 or 9. And that's because Social Security and Medicare are there to help provide a baseline of security for people once they retire. That program should be preserved. Now, demographics have made this challenging. People are living longer. We had the baby boom. We have a lot of people now who are over 65 and qualified for benefits. But a way to help preserve that program is to get rid of the cap on Social Security taxes. And for the uninitiated, basically, once you earn past a certain amount, you are no longer taxed for Social Security. By lifting that and taxing all income, I think the cap at the moment is about $170,000. So if you make over $170,000, that money above $170,000 is not taxed for Social Security and Medicare. Getting rid of the cap would tax that so that we could help preserve this program for generations to come. And I do support that.
All right, our next caller with a question, we've got Peter from Seattle. Peter, welcome to the call. You're live with Congressman Smith. Go ahead with your question.
Congressman Smith, as a supporter, I'm glad you took my call. My question is, I feel uneasy about the power of the purse and how much power that Congress has given to the executive branch. Maybe not even over the Trump years, but maybe over the past 20 years. It feels unfair. I mean, we vote you guys in as our electors, and it feels to me like it's getting stripped away. I just want to know, as someone who's been there for almost 30 years, how do you feel about the powers that seemingly are being taken away from Congress?
Yeah, I mean, the executive branch is exerting more and more authority, and this has been the case, even before Trump. Now, I do want to draw a very stark line here. What Trump is doing goes way beyond the problems that we've had with erosion of congressional authority, and I'll get more into that in a moment. But here we're talking about stuff that Congress has acted on, where we have passed appropriations bills, we have done our job, and the president is simply ignoring that. He's ignoring the authority that we have over tariffs and putting those things in place. He's ignoring the restrictions on, on using the U.S. military for domestic law enforcement. So just understand that what Trump is doing is trying to neuter Congress. And a huge problem right now is that the Republican leadership in the House and the Senate is just letting him do it. They're letting him undermine that. And we need to put pressure on them to change that. But look, even before that, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, their fiscal year ends on October 1st. And if Congress hasn't acted, then we don't know how to appropriate the discretionary budget at this point. And typically, what Congress has been doing is passing continuing resolutions, which simply fund the government at the previous year's level. And that's an abdication of responsibility. I mean, that's no way to run a business, to say that, well, you just have to keep spending money the exact same way you did the year before. I mean, that's not a responsible way to run a $6-7 trillion entity like the federal government is. So we have gotten away from legislating. And I've seen this. I mean, part of the problem, a lot of people who get elected to Congress these days are more celebrities than legislators. You know, they want to get as many Twitter followers as possible. They want to be on TV as often as possible. I'm kind of an old school person. I was in the state Senate. I chaired the Judiciary Committee. I passed legislation. I know that that is our primary job. It's not our primary job to see how much attention we individually can get, but we've moved away from that. And as a consequence, a lot of times we have not passed the appropriations bills on time. And when we don't pass the appropriations bills, that power gets passed over to the executive branch. We've abdicated that. We also have not stood up for ourselves when it comes to the commitment of military forces. I opposed President Trump's bombing of Iran. There was no authority to do so. And, I've introduced a resolution, a war powers resolution, to block any further attacks on Iran. So yes, this was a problem before Trump came in and took advantage of it. And we have to reassert our authority. I will say, and I'll knock on wood as I say this, as the chairman of the Armed Services Committee and now ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, for 64 consecutive years, we in Congress have passed the National Defense Authorizing Act, which is a significant piece of legislation that does oversight of DoD, but also has done a lot of other things as well. So in that area, we have maintained our ability to legislate. We'll see. Does Trump allow that, or does he not want that sort of oversight anymore? But you're right. As Congress has become more and more focused on partisan infighting and publicity and less focused on the business of legislating, we have undermined our power and authority. And we need to retake it, because we are, as you put it better than I can put it, we're your voice. We're a representative democracy, not a democracy. Not everyone gets to vote on everything. You pick the people who are supposed to be your voice, and that's me. And that's the 535 members of Congress in the House and the Senate. So we need to stand up for the people and assert that authority. And we got a lot of work to do to take it back.
So our next caller with a question is Courtney in Seattle. Courtney, thank you very much for your patience on hold. Your time is now. You are live with Congressman Smith. Go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, thank you, Congressman Smith. I was hoping for a comment this week from your office that would use your voice in Washington, D.C., and your over 25 years in our government to demand that the international free press be allowed back into Gaza. Israel banned the international free press from Gaza 2 years ago, and the free press has been begging to go back in to report on the events on the ground in Gaza. This week,
I'd be happy to do that.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, this week, I'm sorry, I won't go on too long, but this week there was a terrible incident where Israel bombed a tent with 5 Al Jazeera reporters in it because they felt one of them had worked for Hamas in the past on very scanty evidence. And so to get one reporter, Al Jazeera reporter, who is a very popular, like a reporter in the Middle East, they were happy to kill 5 reporters to get one that they felt had a past with Hamas. So there is a question about the proportionality of the war, the bombing and the war and the death count in Gaza, and the indiscriminate bombing of civilians. And this week there was I guess you call it a coalition of 600 Israeli officials, both prime ministers and past prime ministers, not Netanyahu, of course, but in the military, that they sent a video begging Donald Trump to please use his pressure on Netanyahu to end this war. That it no longer serves the purpose. It should have been over last summer in 2024, and that the continued plans to take over completely Gaza and the West Bank are, in these Israeli officials' words, would be a war crime. So if you could use your voice to let the international free press back into Gaza, we need to see for ourselves what's happening on the ground.
Yes.
I'm sorry to go on so long.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'm happy to do that. And I also used my voice last week to say there should be a permanent ceasefire in exchange for the return of the hostages. There have been a number of other issues. Prime Minister Netanyahu is insisting on the complete destruction of Hamas, which just does not seem achievable after 2.5 years of war. I put out a statement actually referencing a column in the Wall Street Journal that made this point. Hamas is substantially weakened, which is a good thing for everybody. But now we need to support Palestinians who are an alternative to Hamas and in the war. And I think a lot of what is being insisted upon is problematic. Hamas also contributes to this, but I think the offer on the table needs to be permanent. Return the hostages, we'll do a permanent ceasefire, and we'll get back to rebuilding Gaza. I do not support the plans of Prime Minister Netanyahu to occupy Gaza City and basically drive the Palestinians out. I agree with you. It is time for the war to end, and certainly, I would support the free pass being allowed back in. But more importantly, I support ending the war and also massively increasing humanitarian assistance, allowing whatever group that can provide humanitarian assistance to do so. Gosh, over 2 years ago now, or 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, I was in Rafah on the Egypt side of the border, right on the border, looking at all the trucks trying to bring humanitarian aid in. And even back then, I said that Israel has not done enough to allow humanitarian aid in, and in too many instances has restricted it. So I agree with you that that war needs to end, and we need to move towards the rebuilding phase.
All right, looks like we have time for one more question, and we've got Suzanne from Mercer Island joining us now. Suzanne, you are live with Congressman Smith. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Congressman Smith. Thank you for your time and speaking to us. I'm one woman, and I have one vote and funds and a full-time job. What more can I do to offer to make a difference? I feel like I have no power beyond my vote. But what would you have us do? I feel like many of my peers are just up in arms. They were watching our government succumb to an administration that is maybe not so interested in the fairness and evenness of politics and society. What can you tell us to do?
Absolutely. And understand the Trump administration is not interested in fairness at all. I mean, can you imagine a scenario where the president wanted to do something and someone said, yes, sir, but that's against the law. The Constitution doesn't allow it. And him going, okay, all right, I won't do that. That's just not the way he looks at this. He believes that his power is infinite and he should be able to do whatever he wants to do, which is completely contrary to what representative democracy is supposed to be about. And so, yes. Now, what you can do is frustrating and it's difficult because what you want to do is what I want to do. I want to get up tomorrow and I want to give a speech that solves the problem, that stops this unlawful takeover of our government that is moving it towards an autocracy and away from a constitutional republic. And there's no one speech, no one word, no one action that's going to do that. But there are organizations. And I guess the thing that you can do is, yes, the vote is important. It's important to speak out. It's so important to make your opinion known on social media with your friends and elsewhere. But there are also a lot of organizations that advocate for programs across the country. And some, in the Washington state, but also in other aspects of the country, whether you're talking about advocates for building more housing and having fair housing policy, advocates, for immigrant rights, to stop the ICE raids. The Northwest Immigrant Rights Project is a great organization that works on those issues. There are a number of organizations that work to protect Social Security and Medicare. Certainly the AARP, but there's a number of others, names of which are escaping me. So what I would say would probably be most helpful is pick an issue or two that is particularly important to you, whether it's, protecting Medicare and Social Security, whether it's, protecting, or whether it's education or housing or whatever the issue is. Find an organization that is organized around that and join. It doesn't even have to be money. You can add your name, you can add your voice, and that adds power to what these organizations are doing. There's a new nonprofit that a former colleague of mine and a friend of mine in the House, Joe Kennedy, has set up to try to do outreach into red states. Mississippi, Alabama, West Virginia. I always forget the fourth one. And he's trying to do outreach to say we have to be able to persuade a broader group of people about what our concerns are. In areas like my district in Seattle, there's substantial agreement. How do we grow that? So there are a bunch of organizations out there that you can join and follow and participate in to amplify that voice. Find the ones that you think are most effective, the ones that speak to the issues that matter the most to you. Healthcare, protecting the Affordable Care Act, stopping the Medicaid cuts. A lot of organizations that are driving those messages, and crucially, they're driving those messages with the constituents in other districts, in districts that are held by Republicans, who crucially, we need their votes to stop these actions of Trump. And if their constituents are telling them that this matters to them, I've often said that what we need Republican members of Congress to fear their constituents more than they fear Donald Trump, to hear about the issues that matter to their constituents that are being undermined by these policies. So that's what you can do. And then, I always used to have this line. I've been working in politics for a long time, and I've often encountered people who are new to it. Something happened, some issue came up, and they decide to get involved. And they're always so enthusiastic for like the first 6 months. And then after 6 months, it's like, but what I wanted, I haven't gotten everything I wanted. And they get discouraged. And I used to say, well, the thing about politics is you got to be patient and persistent. It's a nation of 350 million people. And they have differences of opinion. You can't just say, this is what we want and it happens. You got to keep at it. And I have now amended how I say that. I no longer say be patient and persistent, be impatient and persistent, because the issues have simply become more and more important and more urgent. But the persistent part is a huge part of it. But there are people, there are organizations who are fighting the good fight on this. Join them, participate, work with them, and you can begin to see some of the results and some of the things that they're working on.
So, Congressman, as I look at the clock, we do need to begin to wind down this call, but I want to make sure that we give you a few moments for some closing thoughts, please.
Certainly. Yeah. Look, these are very, very difficult times. And I struggle sometimes because as I said, I've listened to political arguments and I've heard all the, oh my gosh, the person who's against me is awful and terrible and they're going to destroy the world. And I've always sort of resisted that level of hyperbole. I have tolerance for people who are different than me, who disagree with me. And that's part of that. That's what a representative democracy and what our country is supposed to be about. So I don't like to be sort of hyperactive about everything. But the times now demand it, in my opinion. And people are free to disagree. But when I see what the Trump administration is doing on many of the issues, and you all did a great job of really highlighting the most troubling ones, that are fundamentally undermining our constitutional republic and I think weakening us as a nation, I think there is an urgency that demands us to speak up, speak out, be loud about our concerns, and to move this country in a different direction. So I think it's important to have these conversations and keep doing that. Lastly, I always close where I start. Please stay in touch. I do these things. I know a lot of people are like, I didn't get a chance to ask my question. I didn't get a chance to talk to you. I represent 750,000 people. Can't talk to everybody every day, but I use this as an opportunity to get some feedback. And then I urge you again, please, this is not your only opportunity to tell me what you think I ought to be doing. Reach out to my office. I have an unbelievably responsive staff. We want to hear from you. We want to help you in any way that we can. Please take advantage of that. Stay in touch. I'm doing another one of these in a couple of weeks, and I will keep in touch and do everything I can to try to move us in a more positive direction. Thank you very much for the time.
To echo those words, thank you everybody for joining us on today's telephone town hall with Congressman Adam Smith. If you would like to stay up to date on the Congressman's work, you can follow him on Facebook, X, Instagram, and YouTube with the handle @RepAdamSmith, as well as on Blue Sky with the handle @AdamSmith.house.gov. Now, at this point in the call, if you would like to subscribe to the Congressman's e-newsletter, simply stay on the line and leave your name and email address after the tone. Again, thanks for sharing your time with us this evening. We hope you stay healthy and safe and have a great night. This concludes our call. Goodbye.